The space station called Blackwater Drift smelled like rust and desperation. Kang Do-yoon walked through its narrow corridors, passing merchants selling stolen goods and soldiers looking for trouble. He had been to many places like this before. They were always the same. Dark corners, dangerous people, bad decisions waiting to happen. Do-hyun was 32 years old, but he felt much older. His body carried scars from years of military service and mercenary work. His bank account carried debts that grew larger every month. He had come to Blackwater Drift because he heard about a gambling den where a man could win enough credits to disappear forever, or lose everything and become a slave. Either option sounded fine to him. The gambling den was hidden behind a food stall that sold synthetic noodles. Do-hyun paid the entrance fee and walked down a set of stairs into a room filled with smoke and the sound of cards hitting tables. Aliens of many species sat at various games, but Do-hyun's eyes went straight to the center table. They were playing Void's Edge, the most dangerous card game in the galaxy. Winners took everything. Losers paid with years of their lives, sold into service to cover their debts. It was illegal in most places, but places like Blackwater Drift did not care about laws. Do-hyun sat down at the table. There were 5 other players. 3 were human criminals he recognized from wanted posters. One was a large alien with gray skin and 4 arms. The last player sat in shadows, wearing a hooded cloak that hid their face completely. 2 guards stood behind this mysterious figure. The dealer, a thin woman with metal replacing half her face, looked at Do-hyun with cold eyes. She asked if he understood the rules. He nodded. She asked if he understood the stakes. He nodded again. The game began. Do-hyun played carefully at first. He watched the other players. He noticed how the 3 criminals seemed to work together, signaling each other with small movements. He noticed how the 4-armed alien was losing badly and getting angry. But most of all, he noticed the hooded figure. They were losing too, but they played with skill. They made good decisions. Yet somehow, they always seemed to get bad cards at the worst moments. Do-hyun had spent 10 years in the military before becoming a salvager. He had played cards in every port and station across human space. He knew what cheating looked like. The deck was rigged. He watched more closely. Yes, there it was. The dealer's metal hand moved too fast when she dealt cards to certain players. She was giving the good cards to the criminals and the bad cards to everyone else. The 4-armed alien did not notice. The hooded figure seemed to know but could not prove it. Do-hyun should have walked away. This was not his problem. He had enough troubles of his own. But something about the situation made him angry. He hated cheaters. He hated bullies. And the way those criminals smiled at the hooded figure told him they had planned this trap carefully. The game continued for another hour. The 4-armed alien lost everything and was dragged away, screaming about unfairness. Now it was just Do-hyun, the 3 criminals, and the hooded stranger. The stakes had grown enormous. The criminals pushed harder, betting years of service, expensive ships, rare goods. The hooded figure matched every bet, their voice steady but strained. Do-hyun realized they were trapped. If they tried to leave, the criminals would claim they were running from their debts. If they kept playing, they would lose everything. Do-hyun made his decision. When the dealer reached for the deck, Do-hyun grabbed her metal wrist. The room went silent. The dealer asked him what he thought he was doing. Do-hyun smiled and said he wanted to see the deck. She told him that was against the rules. He told her he did not care about rules in a place that allowed cheating. One of the criminals stood up, his hand moving toward his weapon. He warned Do-hyun to let go and mind his own business. Do-hyun kept smiling. He had stopped caring about his own safety a long time ago. He twisted the dealer's wrist and took the deck. With his other hand, he spread the cards across the table. Even in the dim light, Everyone could see the tiny marks on certain cards. The deck was rigged, just as he suspected. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, all three criminals drew their weapons. The next few seconds were chaos. Do-hyun flipped the table, using it as cover. A plasma bolt flew past his head, burning the wall behind him. He pulled his own pistol and fired twice, hitting one criminal in the shoulder and another in the leg. The third criminal aimed at the hooded figure instead of Do-hyun. Without thinking, Do-hyun threw himself in front of the shot. The plasma bolt hit his shoulder, burning through his jacket and into his flesh. The pain was terrible, but Do-hyun had felt worse. He kept moving, closing the distance to the shooter and hitting him hard in the face with his pistol. The fight ended as quickly as it started. Three criminals lay on the ground, groaning. The dealer had run away. The guards behind the hooded figure had done nothing. Frozen by the speed of the violence, Do-hyun stood in the middle of the destroyed gambling den, his shoulder bleeding and smoking, surrounded by unconscious bodies. He looked at the hooded figure and asked if they were okay. The figure stood slowly. Their hands reached up and pulled back the hood. Do-hyun had seen many aliens in his life, but nothing like this. Her skin was pale violet, smooth as polished stone. Her eyes were silver, reflecting light like mirrors. Her hair was white and seemed to float slightly, as if gravity affected it differently. She was beautiful in a way that felt almost painful to look at. She was Valori. Do-hyun recognized the species from news reports and military briefings. The Valori Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They lived for hundreds of years. They could read minds. They considered humans to be primitive and short-lived. What was a Valori doing in a place like this? The woman spoke in perfect human language. She said her name was Yura. She was the third daughter of Queen Sora, ruler of the Valori Empire. She had been traveling in secret when these criminals discovered her identity and trapped her in this game. They planned to ransom her back to her mother or sell her to the Empire's enemies. Do-hyun stared at her. He had just saved an alien princess. His shoulder was burning. His debts were still unpaid. And now he was probably going to have criminal syndicates hunting him for ruining their plan. He asked her what she planned to do now. Yura's silver eyes studied him carefully. She said that by Valori custom, he had created a life debt. He saved her, so her family now owed him something of equal value. She insisted that he come to the Valori homeworld to receive his reward from the queen herself. Do-hyun laughed. He told her he did not need rewards. He needed medical attention and a fast ship out of this station before those criminals woke up. Yura shook her head. She explained that life debts were sacred to her people. If she did not repay him, her honor would be destroyed. Her family's honor would be destroyed. He had to come with her. Do-hyun looked at the princess with her violet skin and silver eyes. He thought about his empty bank account and his mountain of debts. He thought about the bounty that would certainly be placed on his head after tonight. Maybe going to an alien planet was not the worst idea. He sighed and said he would come with her. But first, he needed someone to stop the bleeding from his shoulder. Yura smiled for the first time. It changed her whole face, making her look younger and almost human. She told him that Valori medicine could heal his wound in hours. She promised he would not regret his decision. Do-hyun was not sure about that. In his experience, decisions made while bleeding in gambling dens rarely turned out well, but he followed her anyway. What else did he have to lose? The Valori homeworld was called Ethon Prime, and it was the most beautiful place Do-hyun had ever seen. The cities were made of crystal that glowed with soft light. The sky had 3 moons that hung like silver coins. The air smelled sweet, like flowers he could not name. Do-hyun stood at the window of his guest room in the royal palace of the 1,000 Moons. He had been here for 2 days, and he still could not believe this was real. The room alone was bigger than any apartment he had ever lived in. The bed was softer than clouds. The food was strange but delicious. But he was not here as a tourist. He was here to collect a reward and leave. That was the plan. Someone knocked on his door. A servant entered and told him the queen would see him now. Do-hyun followed the servant through corridors of white stone and floating lights. Every Valori they passed stared at him. Some looked curious. Others looked disgusted. Humans were rare on Ethon Prime. Humans in the royal palace were almost unheard of. The throne room was enormous. Hundreds of Valori nobles stood in rows, dressed in robes of silver and gold. At the far end, on a throne carved from a single piece of crystal, sat Queen So Aradat. She was old. Do-hyun could feel it somehow, even though her face looked young and perfect. Her eyes were darker than Yura's, almost black, and they held centuries of wisdom and pain. Her white hair fell past her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. Yura stood beside her mother, wearing formal robes that made her look older and more serious than the frightened woman Do-hyun had saved on Blackwater Drift. Do-hyun walked forward and stopped at a respectful distance. He was not sure if he should bow or kneel or what. Nobody had told him the rules. He decided to simply nod his head and hope for the best. The queen spoke. Her voice was soft but filled the entire room. She said she had heard the story of how this human saved her daughter. She asked Do-hyun to tell the story himself. Do-hyun told it simply. He saw cheating. He stopped it. Things got violent. He protected the princess without knowing who she was. That was all. The queen asked why he did it. He was a stranger. Yura was nothing to him. Why risk his life for someone he did not know? Do-hyun thought about the question. He said he hated seeing people get bullied. He had been bullied when he was young, before he learned to fight. He never forgot how it felt to be helpless while others took advantage of him. The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she asked permission to look into his mind. Just the surface, she promised. Just to see if he spoke the truth. Do-hyun hesitated. He had heard about Valori telepathy. They said it felt like cold water pouring through your thoughts. But he had nothing to hide. He said yes. The feeling was strange. Not cold water, but more like someone gently turning the pages of a book. He felt the queen looking at his memories of the gambling den. He felt her see his decision to help, his lack of fear, his acceptance of possible death. When she withdrew from his mind, her expression had changed. Something like surprise showed in her dark eyes. She said he was telling the truth. But more than that, she found something interesting in him. A kind of strength she had not expected from a human. The court began to whisper. Do-hyun did not understand their language, but he could guess what they were saying. A human? Interesting? Impossible. The queen raised her hand for silence. She announced that Kang Do-hyun had created a life debt by saving Princess Yura. By ancient Valori law, such debts must be repaid with royal gifts. She would discuss the proper reward with him privately. The audience was over. Servants led Do-hyun to a smaller room where food and drink waited. He sat down and tried to understand what had just happened. He had expected to receive some credits and leave. Instead, the queen herself wanted to talk to him privately. That seemed like too much attention for a simple salvager. About an hour later, a different servant came. This one wore finer clothes and moved with the confidence of someone important. He introduced himself as Prince Taiwan, Yura's older brother. Taiwan was handsome in the way all Valori were handsome, but his smile did not reach his eyes. He sat across from Do-hyun without asking permission and poured himself a drink. He said he wanted to welcome Do-hyun personally. He said humans were so rarely seen in the palace, and it was exciting to meet one who had done something heroic. His words were friendly, but his voice was not. Then Taiwan leaned forward. He said he had a proposal. The queen was old-fashioned and would probably offer Do-Yun something boring like credits or land. But Taiwan could offer much more. All Do-Yun had to do was watch his sister Yura and report anything interesting to Taiwan. Her meetings, her conversations, her plans. Simple information. In return, Taiwan would triple whatever reward the queen offered. Do-Yun looked at the prince for a long moment. Then he said no. Taiwan's smile disappeared. He asked why not. It was easy money. Yura would never know. Do-Yun said he did not spy on people who trusted him. He had met many men like Taiwan in his life. Men who smiled while planning to hurt others. He would not help such a man against his own sister. The prince stood up slowly. His eyes had gone cold. He warned Do-Yun that refusing him was a mistake. Humans live such short lives already. It would be sad if Do-Yun's life became even shorter. Then he left. Do-Yun sat alone, thinking about what had just happened. He had made an enemy on his second day. That had to be some kind of record. That evening, Queen Sora summoned him to her private chambers. No servants, no guards, just the two of them in a room filled with books and star maps. She offered him tea that tasted like honey and asked about his conversation with Taiwan. Do-Yun was surprised. She knew about it already. She smiled sadly and said mothers always knew when their children were scheming. Do-Yun told her the truth. Taiwan wanted him to spy on Yura. He refused. The queen nodded as if she expected this answer. She said Do-Yun was either very brave or very foolish. Taiwan was ambitious and dangerous. He had spent years building power among the noble houses. He dreamed of inheriting the throne, even though Valori's succession was not based on birth order. Do-Yun asked why she was telling him this. He was just a human visitor. He would take his reward and leave soon. The queen's dark eyes studied him. She said that was the problem. By Valori law, saving royal blood could not be repaid with simple credits. It required a royal gift, something of true value. She offered him a position. He would become the official guardian of Princess Yura for 1 year. He would protect her, accompany her to official functions, and serve as her personal security. In return, he would receive enough wealth to live comfortably for 10 human lifetimes. Do-Yun started to refuse. A year was too long. He had things to do, places to go. But the queen raised her hand. She said he had already accepted. When he arrived at the palace, servants brought him food. Salt was placed on the table, and he used it. By eating salt in her home, he had accepted her hospitality according to Valori custom. That hospitality now extended to service. Do-Yun felt trapped. He asked if this was some kind of trick. The queen's expression softened. She said it was not a trick. It was opportunity. She had looked into his mind and seen something rare. He had courage without cruelty, strength without pride. These qualities were valuable, and she wanted to keep them close. Besides, she added, her daughter needed a protector who was not afraid of Valori politics. Someone from outside their world. Someone like him. Do-Yun thought about running. He could steal a ship and disappear into human space. But his debts would follow him. The criminals from Blackwater Drift would hunt him. He had nowhere to go. Maybe staying was not the worst option. He asked about Yura. Did she agree to this arrangement? The queen smiled mysteriously. She said Yura had requested it herself. Do-Yun remembered the princess smiling at him in that ruined gambling den. He remembered how she looked at him with her silver eyes, seeing something that others missed. He sighed and accepted his fate. 1 year. He could survive 1 year. The queen rose and extended her hand in the human fashion. She welcomed him to the Valori Empire and warned him that nothing here was as simple as it seemed. Do-Yun shook her hand and promised to remember that he had gambled his life for an alien princess. Now he was trapped in her world. And somehow he did not feel as upset about it as he should. 6 months passed faster than Do-yoon expected. Life in the Valori Palace had become almost normal. He woke each morning in his fine room, dressed in clothes that cost more than his old ship, and spent his days protecting a princess who had become something close to a friend. Yura was different from what he first imagined. She was not some spoiled royal who sat on soft cushions all day. She worked hard. She studied politics and history and military tactics. She met with diplomats and merchants and scientists. And through all of it, Do-hyun stood nearby, watching for danger. The danger came twice in 6 months. The first time was during a formal dinner. Do-hyun noticed a servant moving strangely, their eyes fixed on Yura with too much focus. When the servant reached into their robe, Do-hyun was already moving. He tackled the princess to the ground as a tiny dart flew over their heads. The dart was poisoned, the palace doctors later confirmed. One scratch would have killed her. The servant was captured and questioned. They belonged to a noble house that opposed the queen's policies. They were not connected to Taiwan, or at least no connection could be proven. The second time was more personal. Do-hyun was walking through the palace gardens at night when 3 figures surrounded him. They wore masks and carried weapons designed to hurt without killing. They wanted to send a message, they said. Humans did not belong in the royal court. He should leave before something worse happened. Do-hyun did not leave. Instead, he broke one attacker's arm, knocked another unconscious, and chased the third through the gardens until the palace guards arrived. The attackers were never identified. Their masks and weapons dissolved into dust, leaving no evidence. After that night, the court began to see Do-hyun differently. Some nobles who had ignored him now nodded when he passed. Others who had smiled at him now looked away with fear. The human guardian, they called him. It was not entirely a compliment. Yura noticed the change. One evening, as they walked through the crystalline hallways, she thanked him for everything he had done. She said she knew this life was strange for him. A human trapped in an alien court, surrounded by people who thought he was beneath them. Do-hyun shrugged. He told her he had faced worse. At least here the food was good. Yura laughed. It was a beautiful sound that echoed off the crystal walls. She said he was strange. Most humans she had studied were emotional and loud. He was quiet and calm, like a deep pool of water. He told her that life had taught him to save his energy. Emotional people made mistakes. Calm people survived. She asked what had happened to make him this way. He was silent for a long moment. Then he told her about his past. His childhood in the lower districts of Earth's colonies. His military service that ended when his unit was betrayed by their own commanders. His years as a salvager, picking through the remains of dead ships, always alone. Yura listened without interrupting. When he finished, she touched his arm gently. She said his life had been full of pain, but he had not let it make him cruel. That was rare and precious. Then she told him about her own fears. Being a princess sounded wonderful, but it was actually terrifying. Her mother was over 400 years old and would live many centuries more, but eventually Sora would choose a successor. Yura might become queen someday. The thought kept her awake at night. She was not like her brother Taiwan. She did not want power. She wanted to help her people, to build bridges between the Valori and other species, to make the galaxy a little better. But queens did not get to have simple dreams. Do-hyun understood. He told her that leaders did not choose their responsibilities. They accepted them because someone had to. If she became queen someday, she would be good at it. He could tell. Yura looked at him with her silver eyes, and something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but something deeper than friendship. Understanding, perhaps. Two lonely people recognizing each other. Their moment was interrupted by a message. A ship had arrived at the palace landing port. A human ship. Do-hyun went to investigate and found a face he never expected to see again. Captain Jisoo, his former crewmate from his salvaging days. She was shorter than him, with sharp eyes and a quick smile that hid a dangerous mind. She greeted him with a punch to his shoulder and a laugh. She said she had heard rumors about a human playing guardian to a Valori princess. She had to see it for herself. They sat in a small room and shared drinks while Jisoo explained why she had really come. Her trading mission was real, but she also carried a warning. Someone had put a massive bounty on Do-hyun's head. The criminals from Blackwater Drift wanted revenge for their ruined operation. They were offering enough credits to make any bounty hunter interested. Do-hyun thanked her for the warning. He asked if she was planning to collect the bounty herself. She laughed and said she was tempted, but he still owed her money from a card game 3 years ago. She would wait until he paid that first. They talked for hours, sharing memories of their old life. Jisoo noticed something different about Do-hyun. He seemed more alive than before. Less like a man waiting to die and more like a man with something to protect. She asked if it was the princess. He said he did not know what she meant. She smiled and said he was a terrible liar. Before she left, Jisoo made him an offer. Her ship was fast. If he ever wanted to escape this golden cage, she would help him. No questions asked. Do-hyun thanked her but said nothing more. She understood. Some cages were worth staying in. The next day, Taiwan summoned Do-hyun to his private chambers. The prince had been quiet for months, watching and waiting. Now he decided to speak. He told Do-hyun that he was impressed. Surviving 2 assassination attempts was not easy. Winning the court's respect was even harder. For a human, Do-hyun had done well, but Taiwan warned him not to forget his place. He was still an outsider, still a primitive creature from a primitive species. The queen might find him amusing, and Yura might find him useful, but one day they would remember what he truly was. Pets who bit their masters got put down, Taiwan said. He should remember that. Do-hyun met the prince's dark eyes without flinching. He said he was nobody's pet. He was a man who kept his promises. He had promised to protect Yura for 1 year, and he would do exactly that. Anyone who tried to hurt her would regret it. Taiwan smiled coldly. He said Do-hyun's year was almost half over. Many things could happen in 6 months. That night, Queen Sora summoned Do-hyun to her private chambers again. She asked him a simple question. Why had he not tried to escape? He could have stolen a ship. He could have asked Captain Jisoo for help. The palace was not a prison. If he truly wanted to leave, he could find a way. Do-hyun was honest. He told her that at first, he stayed because he had nowhere else to go. His debts and enemies were waiting in human space. Staying here was safer. But now, he admitted, things had changed. He had found something here. Purpose, belonging, maybe even friendship. He was not ready to give that up. The queen studied him for a long moment. Then she asked if his feelings for her daughter were part of that belonging. Do-hyun's face grew warm. He said he respected the princess. He admired her courage and her kindness. But he was human, and she was Valori. Their lives moved at different speeds. Whatever he felt did not matter. Queen Sora smiled sadly. She said he was wrong about that. Feelings always mattered. But she appreciated his honesty. She warned him that difficult times were coming. Her son Taiwan was building alliances with nobles who wanted war with humanity. They saw humans as a threat that needed to be crushed before they grew stronger. Having a human guardian for a princess embarrassed their cause. They would try to remove him. Do-hyun said he was not afraid. The queen said that was precisely why she trusted him. Before he left, she gave him one final warning. A Valori warship had been destroyed at the border with human space. Evidence suggested human attackers. If this was true, war would follow. Everything Do-hyun had built in 6 months could be destroyed in days. He walked back to his room through empty corridors, thinking about Yura's smile and Taiwan's threats and the wars that started from lies. Whatever was coming, he would face it. He had spent too many years running from problems. This time, he would stand his ground. The palace was in chaos. News of the destroyed Valori warship spread like fire through dry grass. 300 Valori soldiers dead. Evidence of human weapons found in the wreckage. The galaxy held its breath waiting for war. Do-hyun watched from the shadows as nobles demanded revenge. They wanted fleets sent to human colonies. They wanted punishment. Blood for blood. The peaceful factions tried to argue for patience, for investigation. But their voices were drowned by anger. Taiwan stood at the center of it all. His face showing grief, but his eyes showing something else. Satisfaction. Do-hyun had seen that look on men who watched their plans succeed. The truth hit Do-hyun like a punch to the stomach. This was not a human attack. This was a trap. Someone had killed Valori soldiers and made it look like humans did it. Someone who wanted war. He needed proof. Do-hyun found Yura in her chambers, her silver eyes red from crying. She had known some of the soldiers on that ship. They were not just numbers to her. They were people with families and dreams. He sat beside her and spoke quietly. He told her what he suspected. The attack was fake. Humans did not benefit from war with the Valori Empire. They would lose badly. Only someone inside the Empire would gain from this conflict. Yura understood immediately. She whispered her brother's name, but understanding was not enough. They needed evidence. Without proof, any accusation would be dismissed as lies from a desperate human. Do-hyun knew what he had to do. He had contacts from his salvaging days. People who dealt in secrets and information. If humans had been hired to attack that ship, someone in the criminal underworld would know about it. He went to Queen Sora that night. He told her his suspicions and his plan. He could find the truth, but he needed permission to leave the palace. He needed resources. The queen listened carefully. Then she told him something that surprised him. She already knew Taiwan was involved. She had suspected her son for years. But Valori law was clear. A queen could not accuse her own child without absolute proof. To do so would tear the empire apart. She gave Do-hyun a secret mission. Find the evidence. Bring it back before the war vote in 10 days. If he succeeded, he would be a hero. If he failed or was caught, she would deny knowing anything about his actions. Do-hyun accepted without hesitation. Before he left, Yura came to see him. Her eyes were dry now, replaced by determination. She gave him a small device. It contained access codes from her personal guard. They would open doors that should remain closed and silence alarms that should ring by giving him these codes. She was committing treason. If anyone discovered what she had done, she would be imprisoned. Maybe executed. Do-hyun tried to refuse, but she pressed the device into his hand. She said she trusted him. She believed in him. He was the only person in the galaxy who would fight this hard for truth. Then she did something neither of them expected. She kissed his cheek, soft and quick, and ran from the room before he could respond. Do-hyun stood alone, touching his cheek, feeling like his world had tilted sideways. Captain Jishu's ship was waiting at the edge of Valori space. Do-hyun explained the situation as they flew toward the criminal stations where answers might hide. Jisoo called him crazy. He was risking his life to save an alien empire from a war they might deserve. What did he care if Valori and humans fought? He could disappear into the far reaches of space and let them all burn. Do-hyun said he could not do that. Millions would die in a war based on lies. Human colonies would be destroyed. Valori families would lose their children. All because one prince wanted power. Besides, he added, someone was waiting for him to come back. Jisoo smiled and shook her head. She said he had it bad. The princess had completely captured him. Do-yoon did not argue. They spent 5 days following the trail of secrets. From criminal stations to pirate hideouts to forgotten outposts where illegal deals were made. Do-hyun called in every favor he was owed. He threatened people who did not want to talk. He paid fortunes in information fees. Slowly, the picture became clear. A Valori noble named Lord Kyuho had hired human pirates to attack the warship. He provided them with stolen Valori navigation codes and paid them in rare gems. The pirates had no idea they were starting a war. They just wanted money. Lord Kyuho was one of Taiwan's closest allies. The connection was undeniable, but they needed physical proof. Data records. Witness testimony. Something that could not be dismissed. The proof was on a remote station called Grey Haven, where Lord Kyuho kept records of his illegal dealings. He thought no one would ever look there. He was wrong. Do-hyun and Jisoo approached Grey Haven carefully. But they were not careful enough. Lord Kyuho had received warning. When Do-hyun entered the station's data center, a dozen armed Valori were waiting. They were not soldiers. They were assassins, trained to kill quickly and quietly. The fight was brutal. Do-hyun moved through the assassins like a storm, using tricks they had never seen. When they attacked high, he went low. When they used their telepathy to predict his moves, he acted without thinking, relying on instinct rather than planning. Humans were unpredictable. That was their greatest weapon. But 12 against 1 was too many. A blade found his side, sliding between his ribs. Another cut his arm. Blood poured from wounds that should have stopped him. He kept fighting. Jisoo appeared from nowhere, her pistol blazing. She had circled around and hit them from behind. Together, they turned impossible odds into something merely terrible. When the last assassin fell, Do-hyun was barely standing. Blood soaked his clothes. His vision was blurring. But he reached the data terminal and found what he needed. Records of payments. Messages between Lord Kyuho and Taiwan. Navigation codes that matched the destroyed warship. He transmitted everything to Queen Sora's private channel, using the codes Yura had given him. Then he collapsed. Jisoo dragged him back to her ship. She worked desperately to stop the bleeding, cursing him for being so reckless, so stubborn, so impossibly human. Do-hyun smiled through the pain. He told her to make sure the evidence arrived. The rest did not matter. She hit him and told him to shut up. She was not going to let him die in some forgotten corner of space. He still owed her money. The journey back to Ethon Prime took 3 days. Do-hyun drifted in and out of consciousness. He dreamed of Yura's silver eyes. He dreamed of the gambling den where everything started. He dreamed of a life he had never expected to want. When they arrived at the palace, Valori doctors rushed him to a medical bay. Their technology was beyond anything humans had developed. Machines hummed and lights flashed, and slowly, impossibly, they put him back together. He woke to find himself in a white room with soft light. His wounds were healed, but he felt weak as a newborn. And his wrists were bound to the bed. A guard stood at the door. When Do-hyun asked what was happening, the guard said nothing. Hours passed. Then the door opened and Queen Sora entered. Her face was impossible to read. She stood beside his bed and looked down at him with those ancient dark eyes. She told him the evidence had worked. The conspiracy was exposed. Lord Kyuho had confessed everything to save himself. Taiwan was under arrest, his allies scattered. The war vote had been cancelled. Do-hyun exhaled with relief. It was over, but the queen was not finished. She said he had killed 3 Valori nobles during his mission. The assassins were members of noble houses, even if they were criminals. Regardless of why he killed them, ancient law demanded consequences. Do-hyun understood. He was still an outsider. still a human who had shed Valori blood. The evidence he found did not change what he had done. The queen leaned close. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. She said she could not let him leave. Not now, not ever. He had become too important, too dangerous, too connected to things that mattered. If she released him, her enemies would use it against her. If she punished him, she would lose someone valuable. She was trapped. And so was he. Dalyun looked into the eyes of the most powerful woman in the Valori Empire. He saw something there he did not expect. Respect. She told him there would be a trial. The outcome was uncertain, but she promised to fight for him as hard as he had fought for her daughter. Then she left, and Dahin was alone with his thoughts. He had gambled everything on this mission. His life, his freedom, his future. Now he would find out if the bet had paid off. The Grand Chamber of Law was older than human civilization. Its walls were carved from stone that had seen 10,000 trials, 10,000 judgments, 10,000 fates decided. Valori nobles filled the viewing galleries, their silver and violet faces watching the human, who stood alone in the center of the floor. Duhayan wore simple clothes instead of the fine robes the palace servants had offered. He wanted them to see him as he truly was. A human, a soldier, a man who made his own choices. The trial had lasted 3 months. Witnesses testified about the conspiracy he had exposed. Survivors from the destroyed warship thanked him for giving them justice. Diplomats from human space sent messages praising his courage, but others testified against him. Nobles who had lost family members in the fight at Grey Haven. Traditionalists who believed that a human killing Valori was unforgivable, regardless of the reason. Politicians who saw an opportunity to embarrass the queen. Queen Sora sat on her crystal throne, presiding over the trial but forbidden by law from interfering in its outcome. Her face revealed nothing. Her dark eyes watched everything. Yura sat in the royal gallery, surrounded by guards and advisors. She visited Doyun every day during his imprisonment. She brought him books and food and news from outside. She held his hand through the bars and told him that everything would be okay. He never asked if she believed that. He did not want to know. On this final day, the chamber fell silent as the chief judge rose to speak. He reviewed the evidence. He acknowledged that Dohyun had saved the princess, exposed a dangerous conspiracy, and prevented a devastating war. These were great services to the empire, but he also acknowledged that Dohyun had killed 3 Valori nobles. Ancient law was clear on this matter. Blood demanded blood. The traditional punishment was execution. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Dohyun felt his heart stop for a moment, then start again. He had known this was possible. He had prepared himself for it. Yura made a sound like a wounded animal. Her guards had to hold her back from running to the floor. The judge continued. However, the queen had requested permission to invoke an ancient law that had not been used in 600 years. The court would now hear her proposal. Queen Sora rose from her throne. She walked down the steps slowly, her robes trailing behind her like silver water. She stopped in the center of the floor, just a few feet from Doyen. She spoke in a voice that filled every corner of the chamber. She acknowledged that ancient law must be respected. She would not ask for it to be ignored. But ancient law had many provisions, and some had been forgotten over the centuries. She invoked the right of crowning merit. Whispers exploded through the galleries. Some nobles looked shocked. Others looked confused. Most had never heard of this law. The queen explained. In ancient times, when the Valori Empire was young and fighting for survival, non-Valori warriors sometimes served alongside their armies. These warriors were not slaves or servants. They were allies who chose to fight for the empire. When such a warrior performed extraordinary service, when they risked everything for the empire's survival, they could be granted a special reward. They could become Valori, not through blood, through law, through the will of the crown. Such a person would receive citizenship, noble status, and all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. They would be bound to the empire permanently. They could never return to their old life. But they would be protected by Valori law instead of judged by it. The killings at Grey Haven would become a matter of noble dispute rather than criminal murder. Different laws would apply. Different outcomes would be possible. The chamber erupted in arguments. Traditionalists shouted that this was impossible, that a human could never be Valori. Progressives argued that the law was clear and the Queen had every right to invoke it. Through it all, Do-hyun stood silent, understanding what was being offered. He could become something he had never imagined. A Valori noble, an official member of the empire. He would have wealth and status and protection, but he would never go home. He would never be human again, not in any legal sense. He would be bound to this world, this people, this life forever. Was that what he wanted? The arguments continued for hours. Finally, the chief judge called for silence. He consulted ancient texts and scrolls. He spoke with legal scholars. He prayed to gods that humans did not recognize. Then he ruled. The Queen's invocation was valid. The right of crowning merit could be applied, but only if Do-hyun accepted it freely. The choice was his. Every eye in the chamber turned to the human standing alone on the ancient floor. Queen Sora looked at him with something like hope. The nobles looked at him with curiosity and fear and disgust. The guards looked at him with professional emptiness, and Yura looked at him with tears streaming down her violet cheeks. Do-hyun thought about his life, his childhood in poverty, his years as a soldier, fighting battles that meant nothing, his time as a salvager, picking through the bones of dead ships, always alone, always empty. He thought about Captain Jisoo, waiting somewhere in human space, probably betting on whether he would survive. She would understand his choice, whatever it was. He thought about the gambling den on Blackwater Drift, where he had walked in hoping to win or lose everything. He had not cared which. That man felt like a stranger now. He spoke. He said that 6 months ago, he was a dead man walking. He had no debts, no purpose, nothing worth living for. He walked into that gambling den expecting to either win big or lose everything. He did not care which. Princess Yura gave him something to protect. The Valori court gave him something to fight for. And Queen Sora gave him the first real challenge he had experienced in years. He paused. He said that he had gambled his life many times before. But this time, he was betting on something better than survival. He knelt in the Valori fashion, his head bowed, his hands open at his sides. He accepted. The chamber fell completely silent. Then Queen Sora stepped forward. She placed her hand on his head and spoke words in the ancient Valori language. Words that had not been spoken to a non-Valori in 6 centuries. When she finished, she commanded him to rise. He stood, and she looked at him with something like pride. She announced that he was now Lord Do-hyun of House Eternal Dawn. He belonged to the Empire. He was one of them. The galleries exploded with noise. Some nobles cheered. Others protested. But it did not matter. The law had been followed. The decision was final. Yura broke free from her guards and ran across the chamber floor. She threw herself into Do-hyun's arms, crying and laughing at the same time. She did not care who was watching. She did not care what anyone thought. Do-hyun held her gently, feeling her tears soak into his shoulder. He whispered that he was sorry for making her worry. She hit his chest weakly and said he was an idiot. He agreed. In the crowd, Captain Jisoo watched from a corner she had snuck into. She shook her head slowly and muttered something about him being an absolute fool who had actually found somewhere to stay. But she was smiling too. Later that night, after the ceremonies and celebrations, Do-hyun stood on a balcony overlooking the Crystal City. The three moons hung in the sky like old friends. Yura found him there. She stood beside him, close, but not touching. She said they had not talked about what this meant for them. He was Valori now, in law if not in blood. She was a princess who might one day become queen. Their lives moved at different speeds. Do-hyun told her he did not have answers. He only knew that he wanted to stay beside her for as long as she would allow it. Whatever that looked like, whatever form it took. He would figure it out as they went. She smiled and said that was the most human thing he had ever said. He smiled back and said he was still learning how to be Valori. She took his hand. Her skin was cool against his warmth. They stood together, watching the moons rise over a world that had become his home. 1 year ago, Kang Do-hyun had walked into a gambling den with nothing to lose. Now he had everything to live for. It was. He decided the best bet he had ever made. Far below, in the palace gardens, Captain Jisoo sat with a bottle of human whiskey and looked up at the balcony, where two figures stood hand in hand. She raised her glass in a silent toast. Then she laughed, finished her drink, and walked back to her ship. She would visit again. After all, a human-turned-Valori noble probably needed reminding about where he came from, and he still owed her money from that card game 3 years ago. Some debts, she thought, were worth collecting in person.